Hey everyone and welcome back. It's Gina from orchidandopal.com and I am back today with a brand new pendant tutorial based on some of the materials from the Peachy Keen themed collection of hot and trendy beads sent by Beads of the Month Club. That's the one I received this month. And if you haven't seen the unboxing video for that one, you can check that out. It is the previous video on my channel and I'll have that linked in the corner. Down below the video, I'll also have a link to this particular subscription if you'd like to try them out, as well as a coupon code and the full list of materials and quantities of everything you'll need to make one of these pendants. Here's a closer look at what we'll be making today, and I will be using some black Fireline beading thread, although white probably would have been better for this project due to the white fixer beads that we have going around that cabochon. The black thread is just easier to see on the video, and feel free to experiment with different colors. I called this one the Tropicana pendant because it just reminds me a little bit of the Tropicana orange juice container from when I was a kid. That just goes to show you never know where inspiration will strike. But as a brief rundown of the materials we'll be using today, we have two sizes of seed beads, the 11-ohs and the 15-ohs, also the 3mm Miyuki Bugle Beads. We'll be creating this bezel around a 12mm cushion cut crystal fancy stone. This one happens to be one I had in my stash that is by Swarovski. We've got some 3x2mm crystal rondelles. And from that hot and trendy subscription club, I'll be showing you how to use those 4-hole vertical fixer beads, those white ones you see surrounding the cabochon, and the one you see there at the top. And also some of the little tri beads, those triangular flat disc beads that I've set up here to look like, I guess, little leaves. To get started with this pendant, you can cut off a comfortable length of beading thread, about 4 to 5 feet typically, or a wingspan is what I'll be starting with, and a size 11 beading needle. And I may add thread at some point as I'm going through these steps, but I won't show you that on this video probably because it's one of those basic skills that a lot of you probably already know if you're trying to take on a project like this. All right, so with all that out of the way, we can gather up our materials, thread our beading needle, and then we can jump into this tutorial. All right, so for our first step, we can gather up the fixer beads, rondelles, the 11-oh seed beads, and the bugles. And you can see these fixers, they have one side that is completely flat on the top, and then the other side has the indention. So I'll refer to the side with the indention as the back, the other side that's flat as the front. And what I'm going to do first is go through one of the front holes of the fixer beads and just string that down and leave about a 6-inch tail thread, which we'll be weaving back in later. And then I'm going to sew through the hole that is off to the right of that. And I'm going to hold the tail thread at the same time that I'm going through it. So you should have something that looks like this. And we're going to pick up a bugle bead and sew down through the other hole, the one that we had gone through originally. And pull, and then just get that bugle bead situated into place on the front, just like that. I'll take my needle, again going through that next hole that we already went through before, holding my tail thread and pulling this nice and tight, and then I'm going to sew through that bugle bead directly. Just to fix this first one in place a little bit more, I'm going to go down and around that fixer bead again. And then through the bugle. And then pick up a new bugle bead and sew down through the one that we're coming out of. And we're going to start to do a little bit of ladder stitch with the bugle beads. So just getting them to sit right next to each other. And we're going to do 4 of those in a little group. So we'll just pull that and repeat that 2 more times. So new bugle bead. So through the previous one. And down through the new one. And we're doing that with 1 more. And then we'll sew up through that 4th one. And then that next step is to just curl those bugle beads on top of the fixer. And you see how my working thread's coming out of that bead right there. That's the corresponding hole that I want to go through at this point. So we're actually attaching that row of 4 bugles onto the front of the fixer bead. And then we can go up through the open hole of the fixer and down through the bugle bead. You can see that it's starting to become attached. And that's why I said before the white thread may be better if you're working with light colored bugle and fixer beads, because that dark thread shows up a little bit at this point, although it does get a little bit hidden once the other beads are in place. One thing we're going to do that's a little bit different up here, we're going to go through that fixer bead again, and this will be the top. We're going to pick up a new bugle and then sew through the hole next to that with our new bugle. And pop that into place. So we've got a bugle bead there at the top, a single one, and then that row of 4 that is on the front of the fixer. In order to continue on, let's just proceed through the next bugle bead. And we'll sew through that fixer. And now we're ready to attach another one to this. At this point, just to get it out of the way, I am going to put a needle on the tail thread and weave that back in a little bit. That way you'll only see the one thread hanging out, that's my working thread. But we'll meet back right around this point in just a moment. Okay, so always feels better to get that tail thread out of the way. And now we can connect this initial piece to a new fixer bead. And we're going to pick up one of our 11-0s, a rondelle and an 11-0. And then I just have that next fixer bead laid out exactly like my first one is. That way I can see where I'm going. We want to go through that hole that's closest to our original fixer bead and sew through that. And you can see we're starting to form that bezel that's going to wrap around our crystal. At this point, coming out of the fixer, we're going to do what we already did, which was pick up a bugle and sew through the open hole of the fixer right next to where we're coming out. And pull nice and tight. Then sew back through the fixer. Give that a pull to bring your beads together again. Then sew through the bugle. Sew through the fixer. And then pick up a new bugle. And sew through the fixer again through that next hole. So the reason I didn't add the bugle the first time is just if you have less threads through the beads or I should say the least amount that you need. It'll just be easier when you have to make multiple passes through the beads. You won't be fighting through a crowd of other thread strands and potentially break those bugles. I've done that more than once, let me tell you. But now we can flip this over and just go ahead and sew through that next bugle bead. And you'll just continue on, just like we did before, adding a succession of 3 more bugles to this one in ladder stitch, reinforcing those as you go. I'm going to go ahead and do those 4, and you can pause it here if you want to, and I'll pick it right back up once I get to the other side of that fixer. All right, keep it up, everyone. I'll be right back. All right, and with that group of 4 bugle beads now, we can go through the corresponding hole of the fixer over there. And then flipping that over, we can go through the open hole. And if you line these up again, you can see at this point, we're not going to add a bugle to the bottom. Sorry about the white on white or cream on white beads. With the thread coming out of this hole here, we'll just go back in through that 4th bugle bead like we did before. You can see it's starting to attach it to that fixer. And then we can go down through the fixer again. Pull tight. Then go up through the next hole of that fixer bead. And this is where you'll just weave back through those bugle beads to get to the other side of the fixer. So that's why you don't have to worry about reinforcing those bugles yet. You don't want too many threads going back and forth through those beads if you can help it. And by going back this way, it serves as a reinforcement anyway. So just going back and forth through that next bugle. And then that'll land us at that final hole there. We can go through the fixer again. And we will pick up our next successive 11-0, Crystal Rondelle, and 11-0. And after we do that, we're going to add on 2 more of our fixer beads in that same manner. So if you need to, you can back up the video to give you a little refresher on how to do that. And in just a moment, we'll meet back with all 4 of our fixer beads on and start to form these into a loop. So keep going and I'll meet you back. And welcome back. So now you can see we've got our beads linked up here. I'm going to pick up that final little group of beads like that. And you can just start to bring those fixers together in that circular shape. Let's go right into that first hole of the first fixer and just take your time. Make sure you're going through the right hole. If you mess up, you can always take it out and try again. No big deal. And right now we want to get to the other side of our fixer bead. Instead of winding through the bugles like we did before, so that we don't add extra thread in there, I'm just going to go under that set of 4 bugles. And pull that. Then go through that hole of the fixer there. And pull tight. Then I'll weave up through the bottom hole of the fixer. Of course, all that'll be hidden behind the beads. Those are at the back. Just sewed underneath the bugles again to hide the thread. And I'll be coming out through that next hole of the fixer at the bottom. And we're going to start to attach the bottoms of the fixer beads with those same clusters like we did before. So an 11-0, a crystal, and an 11-0. Coming out of that hole there, I'm going to hop over to the next fixer bead from the back and sew through that next hole that's closest. So underneath the group of bugle beads and back down through the fixer. Pick up an 11-0, a crystal, and an 11-0, and we'll do that 3 more times. So through the fixer, under the bugles, back down, and let's keep going. And we're at our last round, so we'll pick up that 11-0, crystal, 11-0. Through that next fixer bead. Pull that all together, and if you just take a moment to straighten all that out, you can see we just formed the basis for our bezel. These will all kind of sit vertically like that name suggests. And we're going to start tightening up those groups of beads inside around our crystal. So where we're coming out now, this is going to be the bottom of our bezel. This is the side that doesn't have the bugle bead on the inside of the fixer. And what we want to do is let's go under those bugles again and back through that fixer bead. Pull tight once more. And now we're going to reinforce this bottom area going through those next 3 beads. Skip the next fixer and go through those next 3 beads. So the bottom of our bezel is going to be just a little bit narrower than the top as we're pulling these beads together. Again, skip the next fixer, go through those next 3 beads right there. Skip the fixer, go through the next 3. And pull that all tight. Now what you'll want to do is go around all of those seed beads and crystal rondelles again in a loop and just start to bring them together even tighter so that we have a nice firm base for our crystal to sit on top of. So just take your time, bring those together and pull after each time you go around through a group of beads. And now you can see the base of this is much tighter and also smaller than what the top is looking like. We do want to get back to the top section again. I'm going to go through those next 3 beads there one more time on the bottom. Go through the fixer. Just following the path, I'm going to go underneath the bugles, back down through the next hole of the fixer there at the bottom, And then it may be kind of hard to see, but I'll do my best. We want to go through that hole at the top of that same fixer, letting our thread hide back there on the side. And then we're going to go under that group of 4 bugles, down through the next hole on the fixer. And here we can start to bring these beads together. Let's start by going through those next 3 seed beads in the crystal. This time go through the bugle that's on this other side. And continue going around those seed beads and bugle beads, just like we did with the bottom, pulling those together. Once this beadwork is in place, it'll be easier to manage once the crystal's inside and everything. So if you get through this part, you've gotten through, I think, probably the most challenging part of the piece, and it'll be quite nice once we get that stone inside. So before we tighten that area any further, you can take your cushion cut crystal and place that inside of your beadwork. Just place that underneath those seed beads and everything around that ring that you are tightening up. And it's starting to sit in place, as you can see. And we can go around all these beads again now that the crystal is in place and really start to tighten that down around our stone. So just go through a few beads, hold that with your fingers, pull tight, go through a few more. Hold and pull tight. Then through the bugle, and just continue on. You can do a couple rounds. If you want to, you can even go through a fixer bead like that if you wanted to tighten up the area where the bugles are at the top. And say just go under the bugle that's out there, back down through the fixer, through that same bugle, and you can see how that just brings that a little bit tighter and closer to the fixer that it's in front of. So just depending on your tension and how it's feeling to you, you can use your judgment on tightening that up a little bit more, and you can always come back and do that later. That is up to you. So here's the foundation of our piece, and we've made a lot of good progress. Here's a look at the sides and the bottom. And I could even tighten up the bottom a little bit more. I'll probably do that at the end. At this point, we can sew through that next 11-0. That's where we're going to pick up with our next step. And we'll bring in our tri beads and our 15-0s because we're at the point where we're going to add some of those in. All right, so now let's add in a little bit of green. Let's pick up a tri bead, and these have a coating on one side and not on the other, but I'm not really going to worry about that. I'm just going to pick them up as I go. All right, so then we're going to pick up 3 15-0s. And another tri bead. And then we're going to skip the rondelle and sew through the next 11-0 seed bead. Also through the bugle. And you can go through that next 11-0 as well if you're able to, all in one pass. But I'll go ahead and go through that one separately. I'm just taking my fingers and just positioning those tri-beads so that they are sitting at a slight angle next to the fixers. And we're gonna do that 3 more times to add in our remaining sections. So pick up a tri-bead, 3 15-ohs and a tri-bead. Skip the Crystal Rondelle, go through the 11-oh, and then the bugle and the next 11-oh. And then pull and continue on. So once you have those in place, you can go back through that fixer and then sew through the next bugle bead that's at the top. And we're going to start adding in some additional beads around the side. All right, so now that we're coming out of this bugle, we're going to start adding in some strips of seed beads, starting with a 15-oh. Then we'll pick up 3 of our 11-ohs and a crystal, 3 11-ohs, and a 15-oh. And this time, looking across to our next group of bugle beads, you can see we're coming out of the top of this one. We're going to go through the bottom bugle bead on the next section. So we're going to be creating a crisscross. And we're starting with one portion of that on this round, and then we're going to go back and complete it, and they're going to be like little X's. So again, we'll pick up a 15-oh, 3 11-ohs, a crystal, 3 11-ohs, and a 15-oh. Then sew through the bugle bead at the top this time, and then complete the next 2 sections just like we did those. And we'll go through that next bugle there at the bottom. Now we'll go through the bugle back there at the top. And I am going to weave through the bugles in this section, going back and forth or up and down through those until I get to the bugle there that's at the bottom, which is where we want to be coming out. And we're going to continue on. We'll pick up a 15-oh, 3 11-ohs, and then sew through the crystal only. At this point, we're also going to pick up 3 15-ohs and sew around the crystal again. And we're also going to sew back through the central 15-oh that is just above that one in the center only, just like that. Then sew back through the crystal. And we'll complete our little X shape by picking up 3 11-0s and a 15-0 and sewing through that bugle bead that's on the top of that section. So that's what it looks like from the side perspective, having one of those sections done. Let's do one more together. So again, we're going to pick up a 15-0 and 3 11-0s and then sew through that crystal. Pick up 3 15-0s and then sew back through the crystal. And then grab that 15-0 that's in the center right above and sew through the crystal again, just attaching that bead and kind of tacking it down to the sides so those aren't going to come up. And then to complete this X, we'll just pick up our next 3 11-0s and our 15-0 and sew through the bugle bead at the bottom. So that is our next section done. Just pull that nice and tight. And you can go ahead and complete those next 2 sections, at which point I'll meet you right back and we will continue on. All right, everyone, so this part of our pendant is complete, and you can actually use this as is, as a component in many different ways if you'd like to. What I suggest now, what I will do off camera, is weave back through, especially those seed bead sections on the side, and this back section right here to reinforce and tighten up these beads nice and snug against the crystal. And what we're going to do next is take a new fixer bead. We're going to make a really simple little component, which you can turn into an attachment point for your pendant if you'd like to. Just to give you one example of a way you can do that, I'm going to start with a new piece of thread for that. So like I said, I'll be reinforcing this piece. Then I'll be weaving back in my remaining working thread. And in the next scene, I'm going to be coming back and show you how we'll make the smaller piece and put it all together. All right, so with a new needle, and you can use your remaining thread or a new piece, we're going to take a fixer bead and just go down through the front of that, through one of the holes. And again, you can leave a little bit of a tail thread that we can weave back in later. And you can hang on to that. You can always use a stop bead if you're more comfortable with that, by the way. I just haven't gotten into the practice of using those, and I'm used to not using them for the most part. All right, so from the back of the fixer, we're going to bring in, or pick up rather, another bugle bead and go up through the open hole, just like that. And then we'll pick up another one and sew through the original hole where we started. So you've got a bugle bead on either side now. And now you can sew through that bugle and down through the hole of the fixer bead, pick up a bugle, go down through the next open hole of the fixer that is to the left. So we've attached one there. We're going to pick up another bugle and we'll sew through the fixer. And that'll allow us to go through the next bugle and down through the next hole of the fixer bead. We're just doing this all the way around so that we have 4 bugles on either side. So from here, we'll pick up another bugle, sew through that next hole of that fixer. Pick up another bugle and sew back through the fixer, through the bugle, and through the fixer. Pull tight. And we're going to do that one more time with that last section. and then sew back through the bugle bead there. And now we're going to add a 15-0 in between each of these bugle beads. So I just picked one up, I'm going to sew through the next bugle bead. Pick one up and sew through the next. And we're going to do that 2 more times. Fourth one and through the bugle. And pull. And you can sew around that section again if you'd like to. And we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. So I'm just going to go around those again to bring that all together and to tighten that up just a little bit. Do that next one. And then when you're happy with that, you can go down through the fixer and do the same thing on the other side, adding in those 15-0s at each corner. So now I'm coming through one of those 15-0s at the bottom, and we can pick up 5 more 15-0s at this point. And we'll sew through the 15-0 that is directly on the other side. We're just making a section that we can use to add to our larger crystal component. And we'll pick up 5 more 15-0s. And sew through that 15-0 at the corner of those next bugles. Just like that. So you should have a little strip on either side of the corner of that fixer bead. And then we can take our needle, pick up a crystal rondelle, and sew back through the same 15-0, just fixing one to one side there. Then sewing through the next 5 15-0s. And through that next one that's on the corner. We'll pick up a rondelle, sew around that same 15-0. Then sew through the next 3 15-0s as you're heading towards the back. And this is where we can start to attach our pendant. So having this flipped over to match where we are, we're going to be attaching that area to one of those sections of 3 15-0s that surrounds a crystal on one of the sides of the pendant. So it's up to you which one you want to use. But when you're coming out of the seed bead, you can then just grab that central seed bead there, that 15-0 that is on the side of the larger component. And then looking over to this other section of 5 15-0s next to where you're coming out of, go up through the 2 that precede the crystal on the other side. And there's multiple ways to do this. I'm just showing you how to bring this all together in the manner that I did that. But go ahead and go through the next crystal. And then down through the next 2 seed beads. Go through the 15-0 that's on the center right there. Back up through those other 2 15-0s. And see, as you tighten that up, it brings us together. Going through the crystal. I'm going to flip this around and sew through the 5 15-0s that we get to next. Now let's turn to the front. I'm going to go through the 15-0 that is in the corner. And this time I'm going to sew through that crystal. I'm just turning this again. And we're going to attach this crystal or anchor it to the center 15-0 in this section that's right below. So just go through that 15-0, brings that together, back through the crystal, and pull this nice and tight. And you also might want to do that one more time to reinforce that area. So I'm going through the seed bead and the crystal that once more. And to finish that off, I'm just going to pick up 3 of our 11-0s. Turn that over. So just through the crystal, and they can sit underneath those 15-0s. Pick up 3 more 11-0s, flip it over once more. Sew through that rondelle. Pull tight. And then again, sew through all those 11-0s, that section you just added to reinforce it. And I'm going to do that and I will be right back. And once you have that completed, something simple you could do to have a spot to add this to your chain or your beaded rope. You can just follow your thread path going through the bugles and the seed beads and go up through that bugle and stop at the seed bead in the top corner. And right here, I'll just add, say, a 15-0, an 11-0, a bugle, an 11-0, and then a 15-0. And then sew through the 15-0 that is at that other top corner. Then mirror that, pick up a 15-0, 11-0, bugle, a 11-0, and a 15-0. And then sew through the 15-0 that's on the back. Then sew up through those seed beads again, through the bugle, and maybe just bring those 2 bugles together. So sew through the next one, and then sew back through the other bugle, and sew around again until that area is reinforced. Pull it nice and tight. Then I'm going to add one more 11-0. So I'm picking that up also through the next bugle. Just covers that area just a little bit, makes it look neat and clean. Sewing back through that next bugle. And again, just around those a little bit until this feels reinforced and till I'm ready to weave in my working thread and make a few knots. But we have this section here with that little opening, which will allow us to place that actually on our jewelry. So at this point, I'm going to weave back in the threads, the working and the tail thread, and I'll meet you back and then we can admire our work. So here is the finished pendant. I want to thank you all so much for being here and joining in with me today. I hope you enjoyed following along with this tutorial. If you did decide to make one of these, feel free to leave a comment and let me know how it went. Also, feel free to share a picture and tag me on any of your social media. And don't forget, the link and coupon code for Beads in the Month Club is right down below. I highly recommend them if you're looking for a new beading subscription. And you can find all of the products that I use today and links to similar products down below in the description section. If you did enjoy this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up. Also share it with your other beading groups, wherever that may be. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can follow along and be notified when I am posting new content. Well, that wraps it up for this one. I hope to see you all again real soon. And until then, I want to wish you a fabulous rest of your day. And as always, happy beading.